My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 59 years old. I coached my son's soccer team for 6 seasons. I make a beef stew that my neighbor once described as an act of God, and I don't think he was being dramatic. I've been a licensed electrician for 31 years, which means I've spent 3 decades being the guy people call when something hidden in the walls stops working. Turns out I was better at finding problems in other people's houses than in my own. Until 8 months ago, I would have told you I had a good life. Solid. The kind of life you build with both hands over 40 years and look at on a Sunday morning and think, yeah, I did that right. I don't know whether to feel proud of what I did or exhausted by all of it. Maybe both. Probably both. Welcome back to Dad's Silent Revenge. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories who thought they'd buried everything deep enough were always wrong. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single one. It started on a Wednesday in March, the kind of cold, leftover winter day where the sky can't decide if it wants to snow or just threaten to. My daughter Lee was helping me sort through boxes in the garage. We were getting ready to downsize. My wife Ellen and I had been talking about it for 2 years. The house felt too big since our youngest left for college, and we'd finally pulled the trigger on a realtor. Lee had come over on her day off to help me figure out what went to donation, what went to storage, and what went straight to the dumpster. She's 29, works in hospital administration, has her mother's organizational instincts and my stubbornness, which means she is very efficient and also impossible to argue with. She'd already labeled 3 bins before I'd finished my coffee. I was going through the back shelves, the ones nobody had touched in years, when she called over to me. Dad, what's this? She was holding a manila envelope. Old, the kind of buff yellow that goes almost brown with age, sealed with a metal clasp that had gone green at the edges. No idea, I said. Where was it? Behind the camping bin. Wedged back against the wall. I walked over and looked at it. My name wasn't on it. Ellen's wasn't either. It was addressed to a post office box I didn't recognize, with a return address I didn't know. A street in Dayton, Ohio. The postmark was from 1998. That's not our handwriting, Lee said. No, I said, it's not. You want me to open it? I should have said let me do it. That's what I should have said. But I was holding a camping lantern I'd just found and my hands were full, and Lee was already working the clasp. And in the time it took me to set the lantern down, she'd pulled out what was inside. She went quiet in a way that took me about 4 seconds to recognize as the wrong kind of quiet. Dad, what is it? She looked up at me. Her face had done something I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, that particular expression where she's trying to decide how to say something she doesn't want to say. I think you need to sit down. I didn't sit down. I took the envelope from her and I looked at what was inside. There were letters. 11 of them. Written on personal stationery, the loopy cursive of a woman's handwriting I didn't recognize. They were addressed to Ellen. The first one was dated March 1997. The last was dated November 2001. They were not friendly letters. They were not letters between old college roommates or cousins or coworkers catching up over the years. They were the kind of letters that leave no ambiguity about what they are and what the relationship was. The man's name was Terrence Ogle, and beneath the letters, folded into thirds and tucked flat at the bottom of the envelope, was a single document. A lease agreement dated June 1998, a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio. 2 names on the lease, Ellen's and Terrence's. My wife of 36 years. A lease. On an apartment. In a city 3 hours from our house. During the 5 years she'd been commuting to her regional director job with the insurance company, the job that required her to travel 2 weeks every month, and that she had left in 2002 when the company restructured. The apartment they'd kept together for at least part of those years. Lee was very still beside me. Dad, I see it. How long was she? I don't know. Do you want me to call? No. I folded the lease back along its original creases and put it with the letters and put everything back in the envelope and set the envelope on the workbench with the same care you'd use to set down something that might go off. I want you to not say anything to anyone. Not to your brother. Not to Tim. Tim is her husband, not to your mother. She stared at me. Lay. Okay, she said. Okay, Dad. Good kid. The kind of kid who understands even when she doesn't understand. Here's what I knew in that garage in those first 10 minutes. Ellen had worked for Meridian Regional Insurance from 1995 to 2002. She traveled to their Columbus and Dayton offices, sometimes for 2 weeks at a stretch. I had never questioned it. Why would I? She was good at her job. She was promoted twice. The kids were 9 and 12 when it started. I was working 50-hour weeks running my own electrical contracting business. Life was full. Life was loud. The kind of loud where a lie can hide in the noise for years and nobody notices. What I didn't know yet was that Terrence Ogle wasn't just a man my wife had loved in some apartment in Columbus, while I was home helping kids with homework and coaching Saturday morning soccer. That part came later, and it was going to make everything much worse, and then ultimately, in a way I couldn't have planned if I'd tried, much better. I put the envelope in my truck. I drove to the lake. I sat there for about an hour, with the engine off, watching the water be completely indifferent to my situation, which I found both annoying and helpful. Here's something nobody tells you about this kind of discovery when you're 59 years old. It doesn't feel like rage. Not right away. It feels like vertigo, like the floor of the room you've been standing in for 36 years has quietly shifted about 2 inches to the left, and everything you thought was solid is now just slightly, wrongly tilted. You keep waiting for it to correct itself. It doesn't. I drove home. I made dinner. Ellen got back from her book club at 8:30 and kissed me on the cheek and asked if I'd saved her any of the stew. I said yes. We watched the news. We went to bed. I did not sleep. Ellen came home from her regional insurance job in 2002 when the company reorganized. She told me she'd been offered a severance package and had decided to take it. She said she was ready to be home more, that the traveling had worn her out, that the kids needed her around. I had been relieved, actually. I remember thinking we'd turned a corner. Now I was 39 years older, and lying in the dark, doing the math I'd never needed to do before. The letters ended in 2001. She came home when the relationship ended. I knew before I did anything else that I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. So the next morning, after Ellen left for her gym class, I sat down at my kitchen table with the envelope, a legal pad, and my reading glasses, and I read every letter twice. Terrence Ogle. The letters established a few things clearly. He was in commercial real estate development. He was, based on the way he wrote, a man who thought very highly of himself. He referenced our plans multiple times without specifying what those plans were. He referenced money twice. Once mentioning that he'd covered the remainder of the lease through December, and once saying that Ellen should not worry about the Chicago arrangement, because he'd handle the accounting discreetly. The Chicago arrangement. I had a buddy named Gordon Fisk, who I'd gone to high school with, who had spent the last 22 years working in commercial property law. I called him that afternoon from my truck in the parking lot of the hardware store. Gordon, I said, I need a favor, and I need you to not ask me questions I'm not ready to answer yet. He said, Frank, how long have we known each other? Since 9th grade, then talk. I told him what I'd found. I gave him the name, the company affiliation from the letters, the rough time period. I asked if he could find anything on Terrence Ogle in the commercial real estate world, particularly around 1997 to 2002, particularly in Ohio. Give me a few days, he said. He needed 3. What Gordon found was this. Terrence Ogle had been a development partner at a firm called Midland Growth Capital between 1994 and 2003. During that period, Midland had developed 11 commercial properties in Ohio and Indiana, several of which had gone through Meridian Regional Insurance for commercial liability coverage. My wife's company, my wife's accounts. Gordon pulled what public filings he could and found that 2 of those Midland properties had received unusually favorable terms on their commercial policies, lower premiums, faster claims processing. One instance where a contested claim was resolved in Midland's favor after an internal review whose documentation had apparently never been preserved. Not criminal on its face. Hard to prove. But wrong in a way that had a shape. Ellen hadn't just been having an affair with a man she'd met through work. She'd been in a position of professional trust. And Terrence Ogle had been benefiting from that trust in ways that should have gone through competitive review and didn't. I sat with Gordon's notes spread out on my kitchen table while Ellen was at her sister's for dinner. Gordon, I said, is there anyone at Meridian who would still care about this? Meridian was acquired by Great Lakes Assurance Group in 2008, he said. But the liability on policy irregularities doesn't disappear with a merger. If someone at Great Lakes had documentation of preferential treatment during the Meridian years, and if it was significant enough, how significant? A pause. Frank. Those two properties generated about $14 million in development revenue. I set down my pen. The policies on them were underwritten at rates about 30% below market, and the claim that got resolved in their favor was worth, in 2001 dollars, about $800,000. I picked my pen back up. Gordon said very carefully, I have a contact at the State Insurance Commissioner's office. Not yet, I said. I'm not ready yet. When you are, he said. Call me first. I want to tell you something about what those 3 weeks were like, because I think people assume that when you find out something like this, the next weeks are all confrontation and fireworks and someone sleeping on the couch. That's not what it was. It was the strangest, most ordinary 3 weeks of my life. Ellen and I had dinner every night. We watched a documentary series about national parks. She laughed at something I said on a Tuesday evening and touched my arm the way she always does, and I sat there thinking, I know something you don't know I know. And I felt like I was standing behind a pane of glass, watching my own life from the other side. I told Lee I was handling it. She texted me every 3 days with a single question mark. I texted back a thumbs up. She trusted me. I've always been grateful for that. What I was doing in those 3 weeks was building something. Not out of rage. That's the part people get wrong about this. Rage is the first hour. Rage is the drive to the lake, the hour staring at the water, the night you don't sleep. What comes after it, if you're patient and you're careful, is something else. Something colder and more useful. I was making a list, not of grievances, a list of what I actually had, what it actually meant, and what the right move was. I had letters proving a long-term personal relationship. I had a lease proving cohabitation during a period of active employment. I had Gordon's research suggesting that the relationship had created professional conflicts that benefited Terrence Ogle's company financially. What I didn't have yet was any leverage over Terrence Ogle specifically. And then, because life has a sense of humor that is not haha funny, I found it by accident. I was following a lead Gordon had mentioned in passing. A zoning appeal that Terrence's current firm had submitted to the city council, a large mixed-use development proposed for the east side of our city. Our city. He'd moved here at some point in the last decade. I found his current firm's website in about 40 seconds. Principal partner, photo on the About page, 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of confident jaw that comes with believing for 30 years that everything will work out in your favor. There was also a news item, 6 months old, from the city's business journal. Terrence Ogle's firm had submitted the winning bid on a public-private development contract worth approximately $9 million. A contract funded in part through a city infrastructure grant, a city grant that required, per the grant terms listed in the public filing, a certification of no prior financial impropriety or regulatory violation. I printed that page. I put it in a folder with Gordon's notes. Then I called Gordon back. I'm ready, I said. He went very quiet for a second, and then he said, I'll make some calls. What I hadn't expected was for Terrence to find out first. 11 days after I called Gordon, on a Saturday morning when Ellen had gone to pick up our granddaughter from a sleepover, a black Audi pulled up in front of my house. I watched through the window as a man got out, taller than I'd expected from his photo, wearing a jacket that cost more than I charged for a full panel replacement. He walked up to my front door like he owned the sidewalk. I had seen that walk before. It belongs to men who have never once had a door not opened for them. I opened it before he knocked. We looked at each other. Frank Calloway, he said. That's me, I said. Come in. I don't know what he expected. Probably not that. He followed me into the living room. I did not offer him coffee. We sat down across from each other, and I looked at a man who had spent 5 years with my wife in an apartment in Columbus, and I felt something very still settle into my chest. I think you know why I'm here, he said. I have a guess, I said. He crossed one leg over the other, composed. the composure of someone who has talked his way out of difficult rooms many times. Ellen told me you found some old correspondence, he said. Correspondence, I said. That's a word, Frank. These are old matters, things that were resolved a long time ago between two people who— Old matters, I said pleasantly, like the apartment lease, or the $800,000 insurance claim that got resolved in ways it probably shouldn't have. His composure shifted, just slightly, like a wall that's still standing but you can see it thinking about it. I understand you're angry, he said. No, I said. I don't think you do. People say that as a way to take control of the room. I'm going to take the room back. You came here because someone told you I'd been making inquiries. You came here to find out what I know and to suggest, in whatever politely veiled way you planned, that I should leave it alone. I leaned forward. So let me save you the next 15 minutes, Terrence. Get out of my house. Don't contact Ellen. Don't contact me. And understand that if I ever see your car parked on my street again, everything Gordon Fisk has compiled will be on the desk of the insurance commissioner, the city grants office, and the business reporter at the Tribune before you make it back to your Audi. He stared at me. Whatever you think you have. I don't think anything, I said. I have a lease agreement, 11 letters, 2 property files, and a grant certification that contains a statement you signed. I smiled. Not a warm smile. The certification is the part I'd worry about most if I were you. Have a good day. He left. He did not say goodbye. I watched the Audi until it turned the corner. Then I picked up the phone and called Gordon and told him to move up the timeline by 2 weeks. If you've stuck with me this far, I want to say thank you. Genuinely. You're the reason we do this. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing the map light up. And if this story means something to you, a like and a subscribe costs you nothing and keeps us going. I sat down with Ellen on a Sunday afternoon in April. Our son Eddie was home from Denver for the weekend. He didn't know why. He thought it was just a visit. I'd asked him to be there because I wanted a witness who loved both of us and because I needed someone in the room who wasn't already devastated. Ellen was in the kitchen when I put the envelope on the table. She came in from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs. She set them down. She saw the envelope, and her face did what Rebecca's face had done. That immediate drain of color that tells you a person's body has already processed what their mind hasn't said yet. She knew exactly what it was. Leigh found it, I said. In the garage, 3 weeks ago. Ellen set down the mugs very carefully. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down with the posture of someone who has been bracing for something for so long that when it finally arrives, the exhaustion of bracing is almost a relief. Frank, she said. How long? I said. A breath. 4 years, 1997 to 2001, the apartment, yes, the insurance claims. She closed her eyes. I didn't initiate that. He asked me for— I know what he asked you for, I said, and I know what you gave him. Eddie was sitting at the end of the table, very still, watching his parents like a man who has just realized he's witnessing something he'll carry the rest of his life. Mom, he said quietly. Just that. Just her name. She looked at her son. Something in her face broke in a way that I hadn't seen before. Not the composed crying she'd always been capable of. Something rawer. I ended it, she said. In 2001. I ended it, and I came home and I chose this family. You chose this family, I said, and you kept the letters. Silent. Why did you keep them? I asked. And I genuinely wanted to know. It was the question I'd been sitting with for 3 weeks and couldn't answer on my own. Why does a person who wants to bury something keep the shovel? She didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands on the table, and when she spoke, her voice was very quiet. I thought, she said, that keeping them was the way I made myself remember what I'd done. So I wouldn't tell myself it hadn't happened. So I couldn't rewrite it into something easier. She looked up at me. I know how that sounds. It sounds like guilt, I said. It sounds like 30 years of guilt that somehow never made it into a conversation. She nodded. She didn't argue with that. I gave her points for not arguing with it. Eddie drove home to his rental house that evening without saying much. He called me at 10 o'clock from his car. Dad, he said, what are you going to do? I've already done most of it, I said. A pause. The question I actually need you to answer, he said, is whether you're okay. I thought about that honestly. I'm somewhere in between, I said. Not okay, not gone. Somewhere in the middle where you put one foot in front of the other and see what's ahead. That's the most dad thing you've ever said, he said. And for some reason that made me laugh. First time in 3 weeks. Sometimes it's your kid who does that. Here's what I want to say about what came next. Before I tell you what actually happened. People think revenge is the moment you expose someone. The confrontation. The dramatic reveal. That's not revenge. That's just consequence delivery. Revenge. Real. Patient. Satisfying revenge. Is what happens when you do the right thing for the right reasons. And the right thing happens to also be the thing that brings someone's carefully constructed house of cards down around them. I didn't call the Tribune. I didn't call anyone with a camera or a byline. I called the right people. I called the right people in the right order with the right documentation. And then I stepped back and watched the machinery work. Gordon submitted the compiled files to the State Insurance Commissioner's office in late April. The files included the policy irregularities, the lease documentation, establishing the personal relationship during the relevant period, and the timeline correlating policy decisions to the development contracts. Separately, and this was Gordon's doing, not mine, I want to be clear about that. He made contact with Great Lakes Assurance Group's compliance office. Great Lakes, as it turned out, had been quietly suspicious of certain Meridian-era policies for years. They'd had no documentation. Now they had documentation. The insurance commissioner opened a formal review in early May. What I hadn't expected was what that review uncovered that I hadn't known to look for. Terrence Ogle's relationship with Meridian Regional had apparently extended beyond the 2 properties Gordon had found. There were 4 additional properties, smaller deals, but part of the same pattern. The total value of the preferential treatment, across 6 properties over 5 years, came out to approximately $2.1 million in underpaid premiums and favorable claim resolutions. The City Grants Office, which was separately notified by Gordon's contact at the Commissioner's office, opened its own review of Terrence's certification. The one he'd signed, the one that said no prior financial impropriety. Terrence Ogle's firm lost the $9 million development contract in the second week of June. The City Council voted 7-2 to rescind the award pending the ethics review. The contract went back out to competitive bid. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because I did not see it coming, and I had nothing to do with it. And that is the whole point. My son Eddie had been running a small construction and renovation company out of Denver for 6 years. Good work, solid reputation, but Denver is a saturated market and he'd been looking to expand. He'd put in a bid on a project in our city 2 years earlier that had gone to Terrence's firm, which Eddie had accepted as the cost of doing business in a competitive market. When the contract was rebid in June, Eddie submitted again. He was the legitimate low bidder. He was also, as the city was extremely motivated to demonstrate. At that particular moment, the kind of contractor with no flags in his record and no complicated history with anyone on the review board. He called me on a Thursday evening in June. I was in the garage, of all places, because once you find one envelope full of 30-year-old evidence, you develop a powerful need to know what else is hiding back there. "Dad," he said, and his voice had that clarified quality, the voice of someone who's been through a fire and found out on the other side that they're still standing. "Hey, Ed, I got the contract." I put down what I was holding. "Tell me the city project." They rebid it. I put in the same numbers I put in 2 years ago and I got it. I sat down on a stool. "Dad, did you? Was this because of—" "I didn't call anyone," I said. "I submitted documentation to regulatory offices who were entitled to have it. What they did with it is what they were supposed to do with it. You won a bid on your own numbers." A long silence. "The contract value," he said carefully, "is $9 million. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Eddie," I said, "you should buy your kids something nice." He laughed. That big, rolling laugh he's had since he was 8 years old, the one that doesn't leave room for anything else in the space. "First project I build with this," he said. "I'm putting a plaque on it. Calloway and Son. I don't care what the city wants to call it. It better be something people actually want to look at," I said. "Dad, yeah, thank you for handling it the right way." I held the phone for a second. In the garage, in the middle of the afternoon, surrounded by the organized mess of a life I'd built with two hands over 30 years. I handled it the only way I knew how, I said. Everything else was just the world being fair for once. There are things still unresolved. I'll be honest about that, because this isn't a movie and I'm not going to tie a bow on it that isn't there. Ellen and I are separated. We are not divorced, not yet. 36 years of a life doesn't come apart cleanly and it doesn't come apart fast. There are lawyers now. There are conversations that require both of us to sit across a table and be reasonable about things neither of us feels reasonable about. Some days I manage it better than others. Eddie has been in therapy since May. His choice, his timeline. He told me last month that it was helping more than he'd expected. I told him I was glad, and I meant it without any conditions attached, which is something I've been working on. Lee calls me every Sunday. Sometimes we talk about the case. Mostly we talk about other things, her kids, her work, a renovation she's doing on her bathroom that she keeps asking my professional opinion on and then immediately overriding with her own preference. Which is fine. That's always been fine. She gets that from me. Terrence Ogle is still in this city. I don't know if that will change. The ethics review is still open. His firm is still operating, smaller now, quieter, without the city contracts that used to anchor it. I see his name occasionally in the business listings. I don't go looking for it. Here is the thing about a man whose myth has been stripped away from him. The myth is already gone. I don't need to watch the rest. What I have is here. It's a pot of beef stew on a Tuesday night and a phone call from my son about a building that's going up with his name on it. It's Lee, overriding my opinion about subway tile, with the confidence of someone who has never once considered that I might be right. It's my granddaughter at the kitchen table, doing her homework while I pretend to read the paper and actually just watch her be 9 years old and completely unconcerned with anything that happened before she was born. 59 years old, 31 years as an electrician, 6 seasons of youth soccer, 1 envelope found behind a camping bin in a garage in Arch in March. My whole life changed because my daughter picked up something she wasn't supposed to find. And because I was patient enough to do something useful with what was inside it. That's not a tidy ending. But it's an honest one. And after a year of discovering what honesty costs and what it's worth, I'll take honest over tidy every time. If this story meant something to you, we'd love to have you stick around. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone. Subscribe to Dad's Silent Revenge so you never miss a story. There are more coming, and they are worth your time.